Thanks, Glenda. Thank you, Glenda. Welcome and good morning. Kind of hard for me to believe that in 6 weeks it's going to be 2019. I don't know about you, but I'm like, what? How did that happen? So here we are 6 weeks away, and I'd like to ask you a question and just have you raise your hand. So how many of you are confident that you have a plan and that your plan for 2019 is going to get the results that you desire for your family and for your business? Just can you raise your hand? How many of you are confident that? Good. So those of you who are not confident, you're just going to meet with the confident people? No, I'm just kidding you. So hopefully for those of you who are confident, we'll give you something else to think about. For those of you who are looking for some different ways of looking at things, hopefully we'll give you some new things to think about. So when it comes to getting results, I'm kind of have been a fan for a long time of what's the best way to do that. So I would like to believe that we can confidently get the results that we achieve, and we can do that in a way that values what we value, not necessarily what happens to be on our radar screen at the moment. Because a lot of us are focused on what's important to us right now, but I'd like to say that I think we can move beyond that to a deeper level. And so you have in front of you there, you should have buried in there a list of languages. Glenda, I think Glenda's holding it up. So as we go along, one of the things that dawned on me is that there are a lot of misconceptions about language when it comes to thinking about planning and all of that. So I went ahead and made some things here. You can kind of follow along, and I'll refer to them throughout the presentation. So I don't know how many of you know Lori St. Clair, but Lori St. Clair and I are teaming up on this topic. And for those of you who don't know Lori, she is an avid volleyball player, right? Am I right, Lori, about that? And so what I'm really doing is I'm trying to set Lori up for the program that she's going to do on the wisdom of community in December, which will be a much more extensive program than what we're doing today. But Lori will be a perfect person to do that. So I'm teeing up that presentation, and then she will spike it over the net in December. So I just wanted to set that up for you. So my experience with coaching clients is that I see people a lot are trying to keep up. They're trying to desperately manage the way they're managing their business and their lives by keeping up. What I always say to people is stop it. You can't keep up because things are changing too fast. And so it was said, what happens when we get into the mode of keeping up is we find ourselves doing. We're doing. The problem with doing is that it makes us busy. So you can be busy doing, but the question really is whether or not that's going to get the results that you're achieving. And so it was said 130 years ago by Charles Darwin, it's not the strongest of the species that survived or the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So if that was correct 130 years ago, you can only imagine how important it is today that we're able to anticipate change rather than just trying to keep up. So what we want to do is we want to go from spending a lot of our time on doing, and we want to spend more time on thinking. So in my mind's eye, and what I've experienced is, if we think more, we end up being more productive than busy. So it's always, and I hear that a lot from people is, oh, I'm really busy. My always question to that is, but are you productive? Usually, if we're not spending quality time thinking, then we're just doing, and we're not really producing the things that are going to get us the results that we said at the beginning of all this that we really wanted to get done. Does that make sense? I don't know if all of us, I think, experience that from time to time when things really get hectic. So what I'd like to do, we're going to give you, and on your tables there at the end of the meeting, we're going to give you a list of questions that you can use. Not now, Glenda, thank you. So we're going to give you a list of questions that you're going to be able to take with you. The idea behind those questions is to do a little homework between now and December. use those questions to think about your business and how you might better prepare for, for 2019. But today I wanted to just have you think about this one thing in terms of where is your business now. So the way this is designed is, so ideally, the ideal place, I think, is where we have systems in our business, where those systems are all integrated in our business. It seems to be the place where we get maximum productivity, is if we have systems in our business and we're actually, and I consider it to be like if you think of an operating system in a computer, as if an operating system in a computer. But that has to be built on relationships that are built on trust. And so if we don't have relationships either with employees, with prospects, with vendors, we really don't have what we need. And so we're building on relationships, and then you'll have individual systems. You may have individual systems that apply to your business. My experience has been, though, many of us are down here working with in a random way, which tends to keep us busy but not productive. So you can, at your own time, you can kind of see where you are and what kind of a gap there may be for you now, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So I'd like to take a deeper dive from this theory into some actual things that you can put in practice. So a lot of us are down here in a reactive mode, or we're in a doing mode. So we're down here working with the tyranny of the urgent, we're doing, but ideally what we want to do is to get up where we're thinking and preventing. You almost can't put out enough fires if you haven't thought enough about what you're going to do, and so you end up in this constant mode of putting things out, so putting fires out. So what we want to do is we want to get into a thinking, preventing mode as much as we can. So you may remember, I think, Bob, we were talking earlier today, you had mentioned about the E-Myth, and I remember when I learned about working on the business and in the business, and Michael Gerber, I think most of you have probably read that book. I think one of the things that Gerber forgot to do was to give us a playbook about what to do about it, right? He got everybody's attention about, hey, you need to be working on your business, as he said, and in your business, but he never really gave us a playbook. So that playbook, as far as we're going to talk about today, is it looks something like this. So I'm going to work on the direction and plan, Lori's going to work on the goals, and then ultimately you're going to cascade that in through your organization to execution, and that's where your role comes in. So Lori and I are going to tee up for you the direction, the planning, and the goal setting, and then it'll be up to you to turn that into results for your business. Does that make sense? And I have found that this, even though that seems overly simplified, it seems like it works pretty well. I mean, if you do these things well and follow through, you'll usually get the results you're looking for. So because we have a diverse group, these next two slides are designed to work with the fact that some of us are solopreneurs. We don't necessarily have a large group of people working for us. So if we start with what results do we want, and we think about the actions that we have, and we have the correct beliefs and experiences and have the right mind and heart, normally we will get the results that we're looking for. However, if we have problems in any one of these areas, we're not going to get the ultimate results that we're looking for. When it comes to a business, what we want to do, though, is to plan productivity, but it all starts in the same way. What results do we want? But as you can see, you cascade down into the systems, the process and goals, organizational structure and design, and the purpose and mission that all goes into planning productivity. So it's a lot more complex issue when you're trying to work through, if you have a staff that you're trying to work through. So if you're a solopreneur, it's the first slide, and if you have an organization, it's the second slide. So ultimately, what I try to do, and hopefully you do too, I'm looking for what big rocks am I going to need to work on in 2019? What are the big things? What 3 or 4 or 5 things that I can do in 2019 that'll really make a difference, right? So the issue is, how do I find out what those 3, 4, or 5 things are? And then how do I break those big rocks down into smaller rocks, right? So I have the 3 or 4 or 5 things, but then ultimately, typically there's a number of things that you can break those down into. So my experience has been that you can break that process down into three things. One is, what's my business strategy? Two is, what's my marketing strategy? And what's my sales strategy? I think sometimes we make this too complicated. To my mind's eye, it's this. How am I going to make money? What am I going to do to make money so that my business thrives and survives? What am I going to do to get leads? And the third thing is, what am I going to do to convert the leads? Right? So if we think through these three things, we find out what the big and small rocks are. We develop action plans. To me, an action plan is very simple. What am I going to do? Who's going to do it? And when is it going to be done? I think we really overdo it. So if you have an action plan that just breaks out into those three things, it's very easy to manage. And then ultimately, we want to manage what we measure. So why is it important to me? The most important thing of measurement is two things. One is we have to adapt, right? So we put a plan together, but it doesn't always work. It's not exactly what we thought it was going to be. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to make changes on that original plan. So it's important to have measurements, otherwise, bless you, otherwise we don't really know what direction we're going. The other thing is we need to celebrate small wins, right? I mean, during the course of the year, it can be very challenging. There's a lot of times things don't go the way we do. So we need to celebrate those wins. It's hard to do that if we're not measuring and seeing how it's going. So there are missing pieces to what we talked about. One of them is this: we all have blind spots, right? We don't know what we don't know. This is why E4E believes in not flying alone. That's because we need other people's input into what we're doing, where we're going, and so I encourage you to have associates that will help you do that. This is the area where I find that most people do not get the results that they're looking for, is because they don't get to this part right here. We just don't tend to complete what we start. So my feelings are, if you're not going to finish it, don't start it. Some of the most frustrating things that can happen to us is when we spend a lot of time on things and we don't bring it we don't execute on it totally. And so if you want to enjoy your work more and get better results, usually we just have to do a better job of completing what we're working on. I find this to be, we laughed about this a little bit earlier on, but I really do believe if we do a good job setting expectations, inspecting what we expect, and providing for consequences for those things that we're trying to get done, this is a very simple way of being able to track how you're doing. So are you clear, especially for getting things done through other people? Most of the time I find when people don't do what I ask them to do, it's because I didn't do a very good job setting the expectations to begin with. So today, more than ever, we are being expected by our clients to be valuable, to provide true value. I've never seen a time in my career when expectations are higher from clients for us to be valuable. We have to balance both the human side of our business and the tactical side. So you can't work on both. You can't work on one or the other. It really has to be both. And we need to think and act both on the operations and the human side. So we need the thinking and acting, but we also need structure. We have to have the talent that we need, and we have to be totally transparent with the people that we meet in order to do that. So what I'd like you to do, if you would, please, Pat, on the front of the table is a list of questions. If you'll pass that to the people there at your table. So if at the beginning of all of this you said, hey, I've got a good plan for this year, you may have already given thought to these questions. So they might not be new news to you. If you weren't sure, I would suggest that this might be a good place if you're starting to think about your plan for 2019. This list would be a good starter list for you to do. I want to make sure you know these are not the only questions. These are just some questions that you might want to be thinking about. You may have other questions, but I think if you'll start with the questions and then answer those questions, you'll end up with better results. Any questions about what I'm asking you to do? You can consider that a homework assignment, if you will. But I think if you'll invest a little time in that, you'll end up getting better results in next year. Any thoughts? So ultimately, it boils down to making good choices, right? I mean, we all have a tremendous amount of things to do. And so I want to, and you have these terms in your handout there. There are 3 terms that I find very, very useful to me. One is the term divergent. So to me, the term divergent means that we step back from our business, that we diverge from the business of what's going on. The other word that I find very important is the word convergent, the convergent word, which is stepping forward. So it's not like we're stepping back and we're stepping back. We need to be divergent and convergent once we find out what it is that we really want to do. And then we need to use discernment to make good choices about what those things are. So we step back, we diverge. We step forward, we converge on the things that we decide we want to do. But then we ultimately have to make good choices because we can't do it all, right? There's more than we can possibly do. So I would encourage you, if you'd like to know a little bit more about thinking, on our new website, there is a blog called The Art of Better Thinking, which would be some good reading for you if you still have an interest in knowing more about this thinking more and doing less. So that's all I've got. Are there any questions about what we talked about?
Bill, you have a question here about how will I provide personal accountability, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you see people doing that effectively, and then also how do you have a constructive approach to group accountability?
So on personal accountability, I think it's important that we have colleagues that will level with us and that surround ourselves with a handful of people that we know will level with us. Also, I'm a big fan of what I call intellectual honesty. Right, so being honest with myself is step one, and then having a small group of people that I would invite into holding me accountable is the best thing for the small group. As far as large groups of people, I think being clear on expectations, inspecting what we expect, and having consequences are the thing that I find. Obviously more complicated than that, but if we do that really well, that's what I find serves me well. So thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Richard.
I've always been told that positive reinforcement is better than negative, and you have here number 11, motivation, that I have rewards and consequences. So how would you reward people for doing something good? And I know sometimes people need to be disciplined, but as a consequence, how would you do that?
Great question. First of all, consequences has a negative connotation. I don't refer to consequences in a negative way. I think when we think of consequences, for some reason, we think of them that way. To me, it's important that we either be told, nice job, or you need to do it better. To me, that's the consequence. And it's not a I'm going to point fingers at you or slap you. And I have found that it's a lot better to remind people of what a good job they did. You can always tell them that it needs to be done better, but Richard, that's kind of the way I do it is I'm looking for reasons to recognize people for the job they do well. But I'm also going to be quick to point out that, you haven't done it the way we originally talked about it. 99% of the time, when people don't do what I expect them to do, it's usually because I didn't do a very good job explaining it to begin with, which seems kind of crazy, but I don't know. It's just been my experience. Is that usually when I do that, it's like, well, you didn't tell me what, So if I do my job well, Richard, usually it'll work out better. Dale.
Yeah, Bill. You talked about the need to, celebrate your successes in essence. Do you have a frequency, a time frame frequency that you encourage people to do that? Is it daily, weekly? What kind of time frame and how frequently should they do that?
Great question, Dale. I like it to be spontaneous. I think if we have an awareness level that we're looking for reasons to find things being done well, the more spontaneous, the better. I'm not a particularly good fan of programs. If you do this, this, and this, we'll reward you with this, this, and this. The thing I have found to be really great is, hey, Dale, nice job today. Just that little kind word to me is the best way to do it. So I like spontaneity more than, we're going to do this quarterly or monthly. So thank you. Any other thoughts or questions?
Bill, in the short time I've known you, you've expressed or exuded a trait that I admire a great deal, and that's accessibility. Can you speak on accessibility in terms of leadership in an organization?
I don't believe, excuse me, Bill, this is my philosophy. That's why I'm there. I mean, if I can't find the time, if I'm so busy working on things that don't matter really, to not find time to be available to the people that are counting on me for leadership, I'm really there to serve them, is the way I see it. I am there as their servant. And so I think even though I had a sales force of 100 people, I think they always found me readily available. And it's critical, I think, to leadership, especially today. So I think that's it. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.